Tropical Weather Bulletin for September 24th. Well, there's been a lot of development since yesterday, as represented by the fact we don't have 5 tropical depression icons this time. We have Tropical Storm Sam in the Atlantic, as well as the extratropical remnants of Odette still swirling around. There's also Tropical Storm Mindulle and Tropical Depression Dianmu, which made landfall in Vietnam earlier today as a tropical storm. It's day 116 of Atlantic hurricane season. There's Tropical Storm Sam, which is strengthening and is expected to become a hurricane tonight. There's also Odette, which is seemingly dropping in chances to reform. There's 2 other AOIs, one near Bermuda with a 10% chance, and another one in the Eastern Atlantic with a 30% chance. In the Eastern Pacific, there's been so much loss in model support that we no longer have that area of interest that was a few hundred miles west of Mexico. So at this point, it's not down to 0%. We also do not agree and do not have that Central Pacific AOI that the CPHC has. In the Western Pacific, here's what we're looking at. There is Tropical Storm Mindulle, which is expected to intensify and eventually become a Category 4 typhoon by the latest Joint Typhoon Warning Center forecast. And then, of course, there is Dianmu, which is hardly alive at this point as it continues westward of Vietnam. In the North Indian Ocean, Invest 90S is gone, which means we are back to the no storms active side of things. And of course, that is going to be the trend for some time, given the fact that there are no indications of anything forming for right now. With that, here's the Atlantic satellite imagery. You can see what is going on. Of course, Sam looking pretty healthy, especially with that spiral structure that it's already got there. Definitely some really good conditions for it to tap into. A strong Category 3 is what the National Hurricane Center is expecting at this time. In the Eastern Pacific, not much going on now that the area of interest is now down to 0%. It's entering more hostile conditions, and it's really fallen apart over the last several hours, so it's really just not looking any likely at all to develop. The National Hurricane Center will likely be dropping it off as well. In the Western Pacific, you can see Dianmu to the left making landfall early as a 45-mile-an-hour storm. And then, of course, there is also Mindulle, which is expected to intensify. It's getting itself more or less together right now, but it is expected to get its intensification trend before peaking during the weekend or early next week. So that is what we're looking at least for the Western Pacific. It's a little bit early to say how much the impacts will be in Japan. In the North Indian Ocean, here's what we're looking at. Not much going on. You can kind of see the outflow in the extreme right portion of the map there from Dianmu. And then, of course, there's still the monsoonal activity going on in the Bay of Bengal. Arabian Sea looking pretty dry. And then, of course, we're taking it over to Mindulle, which recently passed over some of the Northern Mariana Islands, specifically Guam. And it is expected to make a curve towards the north-northwest. And that's where its intensification will really be taking off. Of course, day 4 is where it will likely peak before weakening begins. But needless to say, Category 4 would make it the next major typhoon of the year. Here the sea surface temperatures, of course, 28 to 29 degrees Celsius in the Eastern Pacific, 27 to 28 as you head towards the Central Pacific. Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean, Western Atlantic, and of course the main development region are all 28 to 29. Some of the Bahamas are near 30, and the temperatures that we saw drop off from Larry are still continuing to fill in as we head into the last week of September. Other than that, nothing really much different from what we've been seeing, although there's a little bit more 30 degrees Celsius in the main development region. In the North Indian Ocean, here's what we're looking at. We're looking at some 28 to 29 in the Bay of Bengal, 28 as you head into the Arabian Sea, but those temperatures drop off to around 26. And as you head into the Western Pacific, it's mainly around 29 to 30 degrees Celsius, with some areas around 31. Most of that being east of the Philippines and near the equator. And as you head into the southern hemisphere, of course, those temperatures are at 27 and dropping as you head further southward. So not much really going on, of course, with that as to be expected. The season will be kicking off in a few months there. Here the sea surface temperature anomalies in the Atlantic continues to recover, and we now have the second warmest temperatures we've seen in this time of year for the tropical Atlantic, compared to 2005 being the only year warmer than this. Other than that, nothing's really changed, but it's really notable that the Atlantic is this warm for sure. Here is the on this day. Of course, we had a little bit of a mix-up yesterday. Yesterday should have been Forest as it was peaking, and then today would have been Hagapit. But needless to say, we're pretty much fixing out things today. Typhoon Forest was weakening from its pretty strong Category peak. Would eventually curve out. And then, of course, there was also Tropical Storm Narda, which was a pretty long-lived but weak tropical cyclone in the Eastern Pacific. Of course, you can find our On This Day products by Cycle and History, and we'll be back to what we should be having for On This Day graphics and stuff related tomorrow. So that brings us over to the next names. In the Atlantic, we're looking at for Teresa, followed by Victor. Only 3 names remain for the Atlantic. In the Eastern Pacific, we're looking at for Pamela. And in the Central Pacific, you might as well save your tears for another day, because these blinding lights for sure will not get any help in getting Hone. In the Western Pacific, the next 2 names now are Lion Rock, followed by Kompasu. And in the North Indian Ocean, we are looking at for Gulab and Shaheen. Moving on over to the Southern Hemisphere, specifically the Southwestern Indian Ocean, the next 2 names here are Anna, followed by Batsire. In the Australian region, we're looking at for Patty and Ruby. And in the South Pacific, we're looking at for Cody. We'll be back for another Tropical Weather Bulletin tomorrow night.